One of the questions I got asked the most on live stream was, what's better, this or that? You know, are these stats better than those stats and everything? And I thought, rather than just, you know, constantly telling people, oh, that one's better, this one's better, I wanted to put together something that comprehensively explained why each stat is where it is in the priority list. And this will be coming from a Barbarian's perspective. I have a level 100 hardcore Barbarian, but I will do my best to explain like in a more general sense, so this will apply broadly to all classes, and also I'll give, you know, options for hardcore and softcore where applicable. And I also kind of want to add the disclaimer, don't always expect best in slot gear. You know, this is more of a list of things that if you see them on an item, you can kind of identify it as something that may potentially be good and help you kind of reduce the amount of time that you spend in your inventory trying to find good gear. Also, some of these items may not be immediately available in the earlier levels, and again, I will let you know about those as we get into them. Anyways, let's jump into the first piece of gear, and that is our helmet. Now for this, cooldown reduction is absolutely a must-have. Most, if not all classes revolve around like a core buff, a core ability that will have a cooldown, and reducing that and keeping, you know, its use time up is going to be a huge increase in just like survivability, DPS, everything. Cooldown reduction is biz. After that, you're going to want to go for HP. If you're softcore, you may want to go for a mastery weapon skill, which is like your death blow. You can get like +4 to that, up to +4 in that. Huge DPS increase. Total armor for a hardcore player is going to be an absolute must. And then a main stat. And the main stat priority really is either what your class makes the best use of, so whether Barbarian this may be strength, or what your Paragon board is lacking. So later on in the game, you'll have rare nodes in the Paragon board that will require certain stats, like goalposts that you'll need to hit. And for me, it's dexterity, so you'll see a lot of dexterity in my gear. For the chest piece, for the Barbarian, the priority is this, the Rage of Haragath. But if you can't get your hands on this unique, if you're not in World Tier 3, if you've just not found one yet, then what I would recommend going for is max health, ranks to your shouts, all damage reduction types, but starting with the ones that apply the most broadly, you know, like damage reduction flat, or damage reduction to close enemies, bleeding enemies, and, you know, just taking what you can get, but trying to hit those more broadly covered ones if you can. As a side note, in the early game, if you are a Barbarian and you're running Numbing Wrath, a legendary aspect, which I would highly recommend that you do, Fortify Generation can also be a really nice pick here, because it's very hard to actually generate Fortify earlier on, but it's a huge defensive plus. After that, gloves, if you're Whirlwind, it's this unique, Gore's Devastating Grips. If not, then probably what we're going to be looking at is going to be core skill increases. Like you can see here, I have +4 to Whirlwind. And then you're going to want to go for crit chance or attack speed. Again, this is fairly class and build dependent, but most of the time it ends up being crit chance. And then after that, main stats. So again, you know, dexterity, strength, or, you know, perhaps you could have attack speed and crit. If you have a build that uses uniques or a lot of lucky hit, then lucky hit chance is also a very good pick here. Like for example, if you were to have this chest and these legs, which are both uniques, they both proc off of lucky. They both have lucky hit on them. They don't both proc off of it, so that's not correct. But they can both use lucky hit quite well, so perhaps you would want to go it in that instance. Moving on to the legs, for most classes, temerity, it's just insane survivability from this piece of gear, and an actual huge amount of DPS as well, because it will allow you to go conceited, which gives you additional damage based on whether or not you have a barrier. And with these pants, you will have a barrier on like 100% of the time. And also you can maintain your fortify much more easily because you're not being hit directly to your health. These are huge. Like getting these is massive. That's a very big upgrade. That's worth being excited about. Editing Dalkora here now, I completely forgot to even say what the legs priorities were. So for these, it's max health, max armor again as the first two. Damage reduction types, again, 2 of those if you're on hardcore. And if you're on softcore, then maybe you want to consider going for an extra main stat, or you could even go for damage on elite kill. Next, moving on to boots, nice and easy here. Fury cost reduction, massive, absolute must-have. After that, you want double movement speed, so movement speed on an elite kill, or flat movement speed. If you had to pick between the two, personally, I recommend going for flat movement speed first, and then after that, main stat, And as I said earlier, dexterity is the best for me, so I've gone for dexterity. Now, you will notice I've not gone for any resistance on any of this stuff. There is a reason for that. Crip did a really good, really in-depth video on resistances not too long ago, and basically the conclusion was resistances do next to nothing, so that's why we're not using them. This may change in the future, but right now, like, just flat damage reduction is infinitely better than resistances, and that's why we don't see them. Weapons. I want to start by giving a bit of a pro tip for weapons. The first thing you need to consider is the sort of passive implicit, which is the top modifier, overpower damage on the mace here. I'm pointing at my screen. You can't see that. I don't know why. And then on the swords, it's critical hit damage. Now, my build is crit. So obviously, having as many swords as possible gives me the most critical hit damage. This is a massive DPS boost. I don't want to be using an axe, and I don't want to be using like a mace, for example, in these slots. Even if I'm not using the weapon, I still get that benefit. Another thing is you have to consider the weapon DPS of the weapon that is actually being used with your main DPS attack. So for example, with Whirlwind here, you can see I've selected to use my sword because I want to get the bleed from using a sword, which is part of the Barbarian passive. Now, for that reason, I want this weapon to have as much weapon DPS as possible. So this is the #1 stat for this weapon, but this won't apply anywhere else. But this one, yes, weapon DPS is #1 here. For everything else, the other modifiers, I feel like the best is core damage increase. If you can get that, fantastic. And then the rest, these four are basically all the same rank. So any of these four, crit, vulnerable, close enemy, and bleeding, because we can apply these guaranteed to basically every single enemy type. After that, we have slowed and crowd controlled. And the reason these are after is because we can't always slow or crowd control a boss. So they're slightly less reliable on their uptime than everything else. So I would try to avoid them if I can, but still getting them is fantastic because it applies in like 95% of fights that we're going to be into. Now, one other thing that I want to sort of go into here is a bit of a more complex thing when it comes to building, but you can see I have all stat on this one. And the reason I have all stat is because of requirements in my Paragon board. Now, Paragon boards, they have some rare nodes which will actually have a stat requirement tied to them. I'll see one that I've got here. So you can see I need 630 dex, and I have 631. Just made it, but because I made it, I got 15% increased crit damage. But that's not the only one. They're all over the board here. They all have requirements. They're not always the same. Sometimes it's willpower, sometimes it's strength. And you're going to want to try and make up for those shortcomings in the Paragon board itself, but also in your gear where you can. It's all about balancing the sacrifices that you're making elsewhere to get the benefits in, say, your Paragon board. That's part of the depth of building in Diablo, and it's a lot of fun figuring all of this out. So when you have like a main stat on a weapon, don't write it off immediately. Perhaps it can actually be very, very good. Moving on to amulets. Now, these are nice and simple. Fury cost reduction and cooldown reduction. But actually, cooldown reduction first, then fury cost reduction in that order. After that, you're going to want to get either defensive and a mobility, double defensive or double mobility. So you can get movement speed and movement speed on elite kill. Both of those are fantastic. And then you can get things like max armor, damage reduction against close. You can see I have bleeding on this one, which is fantastic. 20% against bleeding for a Whirlwind Barbarian. That is very good. You can have 2 defensives, two movement speeds. You can even have main stat on this one as well. Again, if it's worth it for you, because you're going to be getting a bigger benefit somewhere else. Wow, really tongue twisted on that one. Moving on to, and finally, the rings. These are going to be both the same, basically. So crit chance, resource regeneration, which you can't get until you hit level 70-ish, once you're in tier 4. So until then, just have another damage modifier on it, like damage to close, damage to bleeding, crit damage, and then maximum life for hardcore. Now, if you are a softcore player, you could probably drop one, if not both, of the maximum health rolls on these rings. I have it on both. I'm hardcore. So you could drop those, maybe get, again, vulnerable damage, whatever it is that you end up rolling on those and going for that instead. But obviously, do try and stay alive. Make sure you have enough tankiness. It really does depend on the rest of your gear. As for gems, I feel like the prioritization, again, crit damage on vulnerable. You can get crit damage on crowd controlled, but this is just, again, much more reliable, especially against bosses. And I've gone for max life. Now, depending on whether or not you're running things like Temerity, maybe max life might not be the best for you. So this, I can't say as a general rule. Gems, I actually see most people, like some people are using blues, oranges, they're all over the place at the moment. I feel like the best gem is still yet to be discovered. However, armor is always a safe bet, health is always a safe bet, and it scales extremely well with the effect of Temerity, which gives us a shield based on our max health, is why I've gone for it. But that's everything. If I've left anything unclear, feel free to ask in the comments below. I will try my best to ask. Better still, though, if you're subscribed, you'll get notifications of when I go live on my live stream, which I do here on YouTube, by the way. And you can always pop in and ask there, and I'll do my best to answer. As long as I'm not in the middle of doing something difficult, then I'll get right to you on that one. But I hope this has been helpful. If it has, don't forget to give this video a like to let me know that you found it useful. Many more guides on the way as well. And today we're actually going to be trying to solo a world boss on this Barbarian and not die. Fingers crossed. But yeah, it's been a blast so far. Thank you to all the support from everybody, not just like here on these main like long form videos, but on the live streams as well. You've all been absolutely amazing. And I'll catch you on the next one. All right, peace.